This is a table we have seen earlier. It shows subject names and number of students who like that subject. Let's see how we can represent this data on graph. The graph we are going to plot is called a bar graph. It is a column-based graph. Here, x-axis shows subject names and y-axis shows number of students who liked that subject. Mathematics was liked by 13 students. So for this category, let's draw a column with a height of 13. Science was liked by 11 students, so we will draw a column with a height of 11 for this category. Column height for history will be 9 and English will be 12. Here, height of bars tells you the number of students who like that subject. The scale of a graph is 2. That means 1 unit is equal to 2 students. Let's change the scale to 5. That is 1 unit is equal to 5 students. Then our graph will look like this. Now, let's look into how we can plot a graph when the data is grouped. This is again the same table we have seen earlier. It shows class intervals for marks and number of students who have obtained the marks in that class interval. Let's plot a graph. X-axis shows class interval and y-axis shows number of students in that class interval. There are 2 students in class interval 0 to 10. Therefore, the column height of this class interval is 2. Did you notice any difference between the graph we saw earlier and this graph? Well, in this graph, there are no gaps between 2 columns, while the graph we saw earlier, there were gaps between 2 columns. This graph is called histogram. The previous graph was a bar graph. Histograms are useful for plotting grouped data. Here, 0 and 10 shows 0 to 10 class interval, 10 and 20 shows 10 to 20 class interval, and so on. Since there is no gap between columns, you can see the continuous flow of the data in histogram. If you observe the graph, most students have scored in this class interval. Okay, some differences between histogram and bar graph. Histograms do not have gaps between columns. You can see the gaps in bar graphs. Histograms are good for plotting grouped data, while bar graphs are good for plotting categorical data. Basically, when you are dealing with a continuous data, you would choose histogram, and bar graph is for displaying discrete data. Let's look into one more example. This table shows age groups and number of employees in that age group. We don't have any employees younger than 20. There are 4 employees in this age group. There are 11 employees in this age group, and so on. Let's plot a graph. Looks like most of our employees are in age group 30 to 35. Now, since we don't have any employees younger than 20, the graph is shifted to the right. To skip those groups, since we don't have data for those groups, we will use jagged line. Here it means we are not showing data from 0 to 20. There are so many other ways to plot a column-based graph. Let's see this graph. It shows comparison between Mike's and Joe's earning from January to June. This is also a bar graph. Here, we are drawing two columns per category, one column for Mike and another one for Joe. Okay, so this is all about plotting a bar graphs and histograms. In this video, we'll learn about bar graphs and histogram.